A kind word back and forth with the Secret Service Director, Kimberly, Cheatle on Capitol Hill. But for my money, some individual performances, if you want to call it, or getting in your face about something, what made this so unique is the bipartisan nature of it. And to that, Jared Moskowitz comes to mind, the Florida Democrat, sits on the House Oversight Committee, but cut to the core of the issue here, of the reliance and what could have happened President Trump lost his life that day. And that put it in some dramatic perspective. He is among those Democrats and a good many Republicans, virtually all of them, saying that she should step down. The Congressman kind enough to join us. Congressman, good to have you.
Thanks, Neil.
You were very blunt, very clear. You raised what would seem like perhaps the most obvious issue of all. What if Donald Trump had been killed? Maybe you could explain where you were going with that.
Sure. Well, first, Neil, this was an attack on our country. This was an attack on America. Obviously, being an attack on a former president, this is domestic terrorism, regardless whether you agree or disagree with somebody's politics. And so that's why I think you're seeing in all of Congress' response, it being bipartisan. As we know, the oversight hearing sometimes is not super bipartisan. But here's where I was going with this. Right. The former president was almost assassinated, and she's saying, well, I'm not going to resign. Well, OK, what I wanted to see is where is that line for her? Had this been successful, would she have resigned? And she still said no. And so what that showed me clearly is that she's not willing to have accountability. What I said to her is, look, if it's not going to be you, then it needs to be the people who made these decisions that led to the failure. So will you commit to firing those people when the investigation is concluded? And she still wouldn't commit to firing anybody. And so at that point, it became clear to me that the person who needs to be fired is her.
She's not going anywhere for the time being. Alejandro Mayorkas, her boss at Homeland Security, could do that. But, a lot of people are still angry at him that he hasn't been fired. But it did get me thinking, Congressman, that this administration doesn't do that. It doesn't fire people. It doesn't get rid of people. Not that that should be a badge of courage, but sometimes it's warranted. And it's just not happened with this administration. And this came glaringly to light to prove it.
Well, look, I think it needs to happen in this case, and that's sometimes what the frustration is with the federal government. It feels like you just have tenure, even when you have dramatic failure. I mean, we had a former president almost assassinated live on television, not just for America, but for the world to see. What an embarrassment for Secret Service. So she needs to resign or she needs to be fired. It reminded me, quite frankly, of the terrible hearing that happened many months ago with the presidents of those universities when they just had an abysmal performance. They didn't resign right away, but they ultimately were all gone. And I think that's where this is headed. She is not going to be the director of Secret Service soon. I don't know if it's a day. I don't know if it's a week. I don't know if it's a month. But my guess is she's going to be gone. To see this level of bipartisan outrage of her performance and lack of information that she's willing to provide the committee. It's also why I support the calls for a commission to be set up. We have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. It hadn't happened in 40 years. And now, this to happen on her watch, it's time for her to go.